So, what impact will it have on the system as a whole? So, for example, someone just leaves the profession, and when they do, it leaves more work for people who are sitting behind. You then have to, on an emergency basis, interview more people and hire someone else. And that doesn't always go to plan. So sometimes you end up hiring people who may not be adequate or up to the post you're trying to fill up, which basically leaves the rest of the team more stressed and more burnt out. But I've also seen recently in the present years, when I initially started working in NHS, that was 2013 as an F1 doctor, all of the charge nurses on the ward used to be very senior nurses, very experienced nurses, and obviously through the years with the experience, you kind of become that cogwheel in the machine, and then you have an automatic response to problems. You can problem solve much better, and because of the short staffing currently, what is happening is, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to say that people should not be promoted, but I'm just saying that the junior staff is being promoted to very senior level much quicker. And with that lack of experience, I'm not saying lack of competence, the lack of experience then contributes to the overall slowing down of the departments. And I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but I've definitely noticed it in my field. The quality of work which is coming out of there is not the same as a band 6 or band 7 10 years ago. So that has changed. What else happens is sometimes you have to go to the IMG side. So it's, the international medical graduates who then come here and work in NHS. And I'm not saying there is anything bad about it. I am myself an international medical graduate. I came into this country from Pakistan. I've been through training since then, and I entered it at a very junior stage, at F1 stage, where you're looked after and everyone supervises you adequately. And I'm very, very lucky that I entered this system at a point where there something called supervision was still to a high standard. The way things have changed then is, it's these people who are coming from abroad have worked in healthcare systems which are much different to how things work in NHS. I'm not saying that clinical knowledge or clinical expertise or experience is lacking in any regard. Clinically, they're brilliant. But because things work a bit different, the guidances and policies are a bit different. The communication, there's a huge gap between British communication and any other foreign communication, even American or Australian, leave aside, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or the African countries. It takes them time, number one, to get used to the new healthcare system, and number two, to become a productive member of a new healthcare system. They need teaching and training, which itself will require time and financial investment. And because there is not enough dedicated teaching and training staff, and it has not been increased proportionately, for example, for the workers who are coming from other countries, what then ends up happening is these people are then pushed into the clinical environment where they're supervised by other clinicians, which adds to other clinicians' workload. Number one. Number two, these people, before they could feel completely comfortable with the new system, they are being asked to do stuff that they're probably not very happy with. Let's be very honest, the clinical practice is not a big thing for them. Uh, Following clinical guidelines is not that difficult. It's just the politics and dynamics of the workplace which is new to them, and they find it a bit daunting or overwhelming, and hence cannot contribute to their full capacity. Now the question arises: what are the alternatives? And to be very honest, the alternatives are there's a huge variety of alternatives. I know someone who was offered at a very junior level a very good office job in London by a pharmaceutical company, and they refused it because they thought they should probably finish the training before exploring other avenues, and which was a fair deal. But I can tell you that a lot of private companies would offer medical graduates similar to doctors a huge amount of money. Not just that, if they go anywhere abroad, for example, New Zealand, Australia, they offer more money than what they're offered in UK. So what is happening is a brain drain where you are recruiting people to med school, you're investing public tax money into those training institutions because you are wanting to generate more doctors. But once they become doctors, they leave this country and they go and settle somewhere else. Um, and that is to do with alternative professions. So nurses per hour are were making less than a shelf stacker who was working in one of the supermarkets, for example. Same is for healthcare workers, and these are the jobs. I'm just talking about supermarket workers, for example. These jobs are not high stake as nursing. They are not afraid of litigation. They don't need to have their separate insurances. They don't need to have a registration of professional bodies. So the expenses in those kind of professions are not as high as nursing. And that is why nurses had a strike and they settled for 5% pay rise, which was a bit unfair because then um, the other public sector workers were offered a 6% pay rise. And that brings me to the next question people are asking: why do doctors want more than nurses? I don't think there's a competition here. I think the nurses were offered a deal and they settled for it, and the doctors have also been offered the same deal and they've refused it. And it comes down to your negotiators, the leaders you've chosen. Um, it does sometimes come down to the amount of responsibility and stress that you're put through. So I'm just going to give you a simple example. I'm not saying I do value highly all of the work done by a lot of my nursing colleagues. I still think they should have more than 5% pay increase. I would say 12, 13%, similar to Scotland medics. And that is what I would generally think is a fair pay deal for nurses, because I have seen nurses struggle through hard times, and a lot of friends of mine are nurses. I don't think doctors should have more pay increase than nurses. I think across the board it should be a certain percentage which should be increased every year. The reason doctors are paid more than nurses is because there are less doctors to the number of patients compared to nurses to the number of patients. So, for example, when one nurse is looking after 6 patients, one doctor for the same shift would probably be looking after 20 patients. So, even though the amount of physical work that doctor does may not be the same as the amount of physical work the nurses do, I pretty much appreciate the amount of work the nurses do. The amount of responsibility that is on the shoulder of those doctors is much higher. Nurses, when they have to escalate anything, will speak to a doctor. Doctors will speak to the registrars, and the registrars will have to speak to the consultants. And all of these are different levels of doctors. The consultant sits right at the top and has to make all the decision, take all the responsibility. So, for example, a pilot, when he starts flying, has a income annual salary of about 28,000. A air traffic controller, when they start, have a salary of about 40,000 British pounds. Because the air traffic controller is not responsible for just one plane and the passengers on one plane, but also responsible for all the planes in the whole airspace. And not just that, also responsible for the safety of the ground staff and public and whatnot. A foundation year 1 doctor takes home about 29,000, year 2 doctor about 34,000. I'm reading off the BMA charts here. CT1 and CT2 takes about 40,000 per annum, CT3 about 51,000, and SD678, so this is after 10 years of training, take about 58,000 home. Consultant, this is basic pay, by the way, so if you have to do more work, so this is additional hours or out of hour work, then you obviously get a supplement for that. Consultants take about 88,000 to start with, and after 20 years of service, they take 120,000 per year. Now then,